Hey folks, and welcome back. I am joined by David Logvin from Askwith Games, and David is going to tell us all about Monster User License Agreement. So, David, tell us about the game.
Oh, thanks, Carol, for the intro. Monster User License Agreement is a new campaign setting that I have developed for a tabletop role-playing game called Monsters Monsters. And Monsters Monsters is actually the second edition rule set, and I was a lead developer on that game that just came out in the spring of 2020.
Excellent. So, I guess tell us about the base game. Tell us about Monsters Monsters, and then tell us about how Monster User License Agreement pairs with that.
Sure. So Monsters Monsters actually has a long history. As you probably know, like Dungeons and Dragons came out in 1974, and the second role-playing game that came out was Tunnels and Trolls that came out in 1975. In 1976, they took the Tunnels and Trolls rules and they flipped it around. So instead of playing the bold adventurers, you were playing the bad guys. And Ken St. Andre developed that. He's the developer for Tunnels and Trolls as well as the video game Wasteland. Um, and he also, the editor for that was actually Steve Jackson from Steve Jackson Games.
Yeah, yeah.
So I was a big fan of this game. I really liked it. And I reached out to the developer and said, hey, when are you going to come up with a new version of this rule set? And, you know, I have some ideas. Maybe you'd be interested in doing this. They said, oh, well, we're not interested in doing that right now, but we're going to re-release some old modules for it. And maybe we'll do a mini rule book. I said, okay. And they said, if you have some ideas, we'd love to see them. So this game had been sitting on the shelf since, you know, the mid 70s. And I was just like, you know, I was fanboying out on this game and just saying, it'll be great to see this. So I worked on that in the month of January and gathered all my notes because I'm a tabletop role player. I have tons and tons of notes and put them all together on what I thought would be neat. I sent them in and they liked them. And then they kept expanding it and eventually turned into a hardcover rule book. So it was pretty neat to see that go from just like a small little mini rule book to re-release some modules that were originally published by Judges Guild, and to see that actually come out and come up with a new, you know, modern take on a D6 based role-playing game. So it's an old school game, but it's got some, you know, modern sensibilities in it. So that was what was pretty neat. So
That is so cool. That's such a cool story too. And it's amazing
yeah,
that like you reached out and were like, "Hey, I want to do this thing." And
yeah,
that they wanted to do it also. That's really really cool.
thanks.
So how
So,
does Monster User License Agreement fit into that?
So that actually fits in the way that it's a campaign setting. Think of how like Greyhawk fits in with Dungeons and Dragons. This is a campaign setting, and since I worked as a lead developer, I said, could I come up with and release a licensed adventure in this world? So and they agreed to that. That was something we did from the beginning because I wrote my original campaign setting thinking that it would be paired with a small mini rule book in the front end. So you'd buy a module and it would come with a rule book.
Mm-hmm.
But then the rule book kept growing and growing and growing. So now it's its own hardcover book. So now my thing is a supplement to that. And there's lots of little Easter eggs. Like if you go through the rule book, all of my characters are used to show like how to run combat because I was writing it thinking it was going to be paired with the quick set rules, but instead the quick set rules blossomed into a full rule book that was a very successful Kickstarter in the spring.
That's awesome. So what are people playing in this particular setting?
In this particular setting, what's really neat is the fact that you're going to play all C-list monsters. So if you've ever played the board game Dungeon Lords, it's got a little bit, you know, a little bit of connections to that. But the problem is you're not a great monster. You're the third string monster, and you have your one chance basically to go and run the dungeon. But you're running at the dungeon to make money. So you want to kill the adventurers, but maybe you don't want a total party kill because you want enough people to escape so people will come back next week and try to loot. But you're actually trying to loot them.
Oh
So,
my gosh. So you
so
have to like
there's a lot
find
of
a
metagame
balance
going on.
between killing some of the adventurers, but not all of them. Because you have to leave
Exactly.
someone to tell the tale, otherwise no one's gonna come back to your dungeon.
Yeah, that's what I call the whispering campaign or the marketing that you need to do for your dungeon. You need to release some people or one sneak out into the tavern if you can pass as a human and share that. So
Oh, that sounds like so much fun.
Yeah. So, and there's a lot of other like weird techie jokes that I have going on, um, which I can get into in a second unless you have a follow-up question related to what we just talked about.
Yeah, no, I'd love to hear about the in jokes and Easter eggs.
Sure. So, I mean, the main thing is, so it's called Monster User License Agreement. That's supposed to be um, a joke on every time you download an app, you signed a terrible end user license agreement.
Yeah.
So, but you've signed a monster user license agreement. So basically, it's like, so you're renting a dungeon, but you have to pay a certain amount of the loot that you get and give that to the sorcerer over landlords. And so that's the main little joke. And there's other like weird things in there too. For example, you find out that when you go and try to equip your dungeon, you can't actually pay with gold. You have to pay with a cryptocurrency called Bytecoin. So it's a virtual gold that flows into your bag of holding. So that starts all these side quests that you have to.
Oh no, I lost you. All right, little technical difficulty, like perfectly timed technical difficulties we're talking about. But you're telling us about cryptocurrency.
Yeah, so cryptocurrency is in the game, you have to pay all your bills using like a virtual bag of holding. And that creates a whole bunch of other side quests because you can't just go and buy your supplies. You're like, you need to get a special ring, and that ring will allow you to take the virtual gold and flow from your bag of holding and pay all your bills you need to buy things like traps and supplies and mops to mop up all the bloody guts from the human adventures you're going to slaughter in your game.
Oh my gosh. So you're like a monster running a business dungeon.
Yes.
It's kind of like the horrors of capitalism mixed with the horrors of D&D monsters.
Yeah, and there's some other funny things in there too, like there's a time limit to it. In other words, your dungeon's about to go condo, and you're just like a poor dungeon schlep. So you need to be able to actually show that you can be a dungeon boss and run this. So that's what's going on. So you're like, well, this is my chance at the big time before I'm going to be kicked out on the street and be homeless. So there's a little like anti-gentrification thing going on there too.
I love it.
Um,
Love
and
it.
there's just lots of weird things, like all of the monsters have code names. So, and there's reasons why that, which you'll find out when you play the full adventure. But so instead of being an orc or an Uruk, you're the Earl of Uruks. And instead of I'm trying to think, you're a lizard man, you're the Landgrave of lizard folk. So everybody has like this really weird title and code word, which you'll find out what's going on. One other thing that I did that was interesting and much more challenging from a design side is that these old school the role-playing game Tunnels and Trolls and Monsters always had solo modules. So like the old like Fighting Fantasy or Choose Your Own Adventure books.
Yeah.
I decided
yeah.
a good way to kind of expand the audience and get more people in is to write one of these adventures. So, I downloaded Twine and tried to learn how all this stuff works. And I wrote this massive 30,000 word solo adventure.
Wow.
And so that is a huge, branching with all kinds of different paths. It's been playtesting really well. But what's different about it, and I'm trying to use this as a way to hook, and I'm going to do it when I demo, is that it's basically a prequel to the adventure. So you have a party of 5 people who are going to sit down and play a tabletop RPG. Obviously, these days over Roll20 or whatever you're going to do, since you can't meet face to face. But I wrote this back and started in January. But you pick like 1 or 2 people, and these are the people who need to get the ring for the virtual currency. They go off and they play that adventure, and assuming they survive, they come back with both information and loot. So it's the prequel and setup. So they come and they've gained some experience points, and they've learned a little bit more about the world. So that's the kind of neat thing. So at a con, I could give someone the solo adventure, and in 30 minutes, they have played and learned some of the characters and backstory that they'll come in. If they're going to play a 3 or 4 hour adventure, they already know a little bit of the world because they've gone through and sat down by themselves and played the solo module.
That's so fun. It's such a clever idea too, and such an interesting use of like kind of mixing different mediums and having like that intersection between like digital games and tabletop games. I love that.
Thanks. And I have one other thing that Fighting Fantasy sort of tried once, but 2 people can play the solo adventure and their results actually interact with each other. So that's the other part that I'm still working on, but there are some sort of like results that are get sort of enhanced based on, oh, did you visit the forest of memories? Oh, did you burn the village down? And those things, you take all those results and you basically hand a note card to the GM and said, these are my results. And then the campaign, adventure number one starts after one or two people have played a solo module and sort of gotten a taste of the world. So that's like the sort of the grand scheme of it. But I got sort of like, because I have a writing background, uh, I didn't realize how challenging writing like a pre-programmed adventure is, and making certain that all your branches work and flow properly. And
Sorry about that. We were just having another technical difficulty. But you were telling me about with Twine, just like, having coming from a writing background, but still having um, like this new experience of figuring out all the different branches and how they all work together.
yeah, that was definitely, you know, um, a learning experience. But I thought the tool was really good. Maybe getting the edit, maybe as editing, it was more challenging because you lose things like a spell check right away. So you have to use some other twee or some other overlays and kick it out and bring it back in. But for making sure that you don't dead end anything, or searching and keeping some like keywords, it was really invaluable, especially because I thought I was writing like a 50 paragraph adventure, but instead it turned into like a 300 paragraph thing. And I also added lots of tables within it. And I accidentally wrote a mini game within the story, which was really kind of weird. When I was done, I was like, I actually wrote a little mini skirmish rule set just in the course of writing the story. So
That's
there was
so
a game
fun.
within a game within a game. So maybe you can
Classic
appreciate that.
designer. Classic.
Yes. Thanks.
So let's say somebody wants to do what you're doing. What advice would you give to them about how they should get started?
Well, I mean, I guess I just like, unfortunately right now I can't go to all the cons in person, but I mean, I go to a ton of conventions. Like I realized like one year, I think I went to like 17 different events, and some of them are really small and maybe just have like 30 people, and some of them are Gen Con, you know what I mean? So
Yeah, yeah.
they vary. And sometimes I'm going to like, promote something I'm doing, and sometimes I'm just there to be myself and just to check out all the new games. I mean, I just try to get those face-to-face connections, and just, if there's something you really like, you want to experience it. And like I picked a game that I really liked and I wanted to see a second edition of it. I was like, I hope you guys do that. Maybe I can help to get it out there. So I was just, pitching and just trying to do what I do. But again, it's always a balance of stuff ideas I have, and just I want to be a player as well. So I just try to get a lot of that face to face time. Although obviously it's a little harder these days, but that's
Right. Right. Definitely is. But that's so important. Like the value of networking and getting to meet people is it's just so important when it comes to doing what you're passionate about, especially in the game space.
yeah.
So David, where can people find out more about Askwith Games, more about Monster User License Agreement, and other stuff that you're working on?
Sure. So probably the best place is you can find Monster User License Agreement. I've set up a website on Weebly, so it's monsteruser.weebly.com. And I also have Twitter, which is where I put most of my things for Askwith Games. And you'll find some other things on Board Game Geek. I'm not hard to find there, as well as you can find the core rule book for Monsters if you go to rpggeek.com. You can find links there. And I think they'll soon have the core rule book up on Amazon. And before pandemic days, they were planning like a major release into like independent, game and bookstores. I haven't seen that many bookstores pick up the book yet, but I did join a YouTube stream with one bookstore down in um, in Atlanta called, I think, Play It Again Books, and they're stocking signed copies of the game, which is pretty neat.
Excellent. That's so
And I guess
cool.
the best place is go to drivethroughrpg.com to get the cool rule book. That would be the easiest and fastest to get it into your hands for a pretty reasonable price.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining me and for telling me all about what you're working on. It sounds really, really fun. I can't wait to check it out.
All right. Thanks, Carol. Appreciate the time.
Absolutely. And for those of you who are watching, stick around for more indie interviews.